welcome to episode 2 of the Algorithm Podcast.
Yeah.
Successful first episode.
Yeah, very successful.
Casey Anthony still sucks.
Facts.
Trippy week.
Trippy week.
Today.
Erika's still here.
Erika's still
We're winning.
here.
Let's go.
We're down.
Yeah, we're down to
one of the 4 amigos today. Roswell really wasn't her cup of tea. We'll get her there, though.
Yeah, we're going to get her there.
Definitely going to get her there. Obviously, successful first week. We didn't really talk much about last week about, like, make sure you guys follow the socials.
Oh, yeah, all of them.
TikTok, Facebook, obviously.
Yep.
Definitely subscribe to the YouTube, Instagram, and coming soon to Spotify.
Yes.
I promise you we will be on Spotify.
Yeah, we got to. We got to get that done quick.
I promise.
There's going to be content on all of them, so just keep a lookout.
Do you guys believe in aliens?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I always have.
Always have? Some people are always like,
I don't believe that they look the way that we've always perceived them to look.
Yeah, I'm kind of like I have to see it to believe it type thing, but as a kid, like I literally would, every night when I'd go to bed, I would watch stuff that literally scared me. And there was probably a period of like 2 years where I would have to fall asleep with my covers over my head.
The Fourth Kind.
Yeah.
Fourth Kind is still one of the greatest movies ever.
Yeah, go watch that and piss your bed tonight.
Yeah. So, like, I believe in aliens, right? I don't want to say you're naive if you don't, but if really all that's out there, for the only thing out of everything that's out there, we better have some kind of fucking purpose.
Yeah.
Like, we're fucking up right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the episode today, Roswell, 1947.
Trippy, man.
The first hint that we are not alone, right?
I think it's like the start of all that too. You know what I mean? Like the whole genre of UFOs, of aliens even being real starts right here because of kind of the way they went about it and then backtracked really quick. So
government cover-ups. I don't know if this is like the first, time that we figure out. Obviously, the government's always been shit,
right?
But like actually to a point to where they're hiding things from us, like seriously hiding things from us. Okay, so let's get into this episode. Roswell, New Mexico was a small town of around 15,000 people, and half of them were stationed on a military base. So this was in 1947, so around the tail end of World War II, start of the Cold War. A town of 15,000 people, and 7,000 of them were in the military, like on the military base, military families, so forth. It was a small town of great people, great American values. People always smiled, waved at each other, said hello, and were very polite. Just your typical, like, old school, say hi to your neighbor type town. Like, very polite, say please and thank you.
It was the 40s.
Yeah, it seemed like that's kind of like the documentary we were kind of basing the episode around. They seemed like very patriotic too.
Yes, very patriotic. They all had their hand in doing things for the military. Yep. Whether it's like, I think
war effort stuff. Yeah.
War effort stuff. Exactly. This is a time at the tail end of World War II and the startup of the Cold War. Okay, so on the evening of July 2nd, 1947, several witnesses in and near Roswell, New Mexico, observed a disc-shaped object moving swiftly in the northwest through the sky. The following morning, Mac Brazel is like a huge character in all of this. Like, he's one of the first few people that come forth saying, I found some shit. Like, that's not from this world. Mac Brazel, foreman of a ranch located near Tiny Corona, New Mexico, rode out on horseback to move sheep from one field to another. By his side was a young neighbor boy, Timothy D. Proctor. As they rode, they came upon strange debris, various sized chunks of metallic material, running from one hilltop down arroyo up another hill and running down another side. To all appearances, some kind of aircraft had exploded. So just like your typical, like something you'd see in a fucking movie.
Yeah.
Like out in the desert. Crafts come flying, boom, boom, boom. It's the scene out of a fucking movie.
Yeah, and I think at first sight they kind of explain it as they thought it was a plane crash. So
Yep, we'll get into the fire department,
Yeah,
get
all
involvement, all of that. In fact, Brazel had heard something that sounded like an explosion the night before, but because it happened during a rainstorm, even though it was different from thunder, he had not looked into the cause. Brazel picked up some of the pieces. He had never seen anything like them. They were extremely light and very tough. So we'll get into like the material that he found. Like, I guess they were saying like it was like an element that we've never seen before. We'll describe it in a little bit.
Frankie Rowe was a 12-year-old girl who grew up in Roswell. Her father, Frank Dwyer, was a crew chief for the fire department in Roswell. One day her dad comes home from work and he walks in extremely excited. Frankie had never seen him so excited in her life. He tells the mother and Frankie that he needs them all in the room and that he's got the biggest news he's ever given them. He proceeds to tell the family that they had gone out on a call to what they thought was going to be a plane crash, but when they got out there, it wasn't a plane that they had seen, but a craft that he had described was from somewhere else.
Okay, so when this crash happened, there was like a small delay, but then instant like archaeologists, the army, the fire department. So this crash happened 75 miles away from like the interstate and where people like were, right? So they were the army went and blocked off exits off of the interstate 75 miles away from the town. So they were instantly trying to keep people the fuck away. Why are you instantly trying to keep people the fuck away if the crash is 75 miles away?
And I think that's something like that you'll come to find out the longer the episode goes, that when it came down to like people the whole thing getting out in the first place was that people, actual civilians got there first.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And this story, like this episode, is going to be based around this documentary called Cover Up 75 years later, and we're also going to have our own little spills in it. But there's one person in this episode that this story is kind of centered around, and it's Frankie Rowe.
Yeah.
She was a 12-year-old girl, and her story, if it doesn't make you believe there's at least something going on,
right,
you're just naive.
Yeah. Their mother began to ask Frank tons of questions. "What do you mean, somewhere else?" she said. He proceeds to tell her it's not an airplane, it's not from this world. He tells the family that the crash matched the description of a flying saucers that people had been talking about on the news. He then says when they arrived at the crash that they could see there were 2 bodies laying outside the craft and also one little person walking around still alive. "What did they look like?" the mother asked Frank. He replied, "They were very small, about the size of a 10-year-old child, but the head looked like the insect that the kids played with they called the Child of Earth, a very clear-skinned, big-headed insect."
This is another thing that makes me think that aliens do not look how we perceive them to look. Even like from the movie Signs, you see they're big and tall and skinny and just freaky looking, and this describes what looks to be a child. Creepy.
Yeah.
Definitely creepy.
And it's like, okay, so this is the fire department saying this. Like, why are they lying about this? Like, why would they lie? Like, why would her dad come in and it's the most excited she's ever seen him in her life? I got something to tell you. This is not, we've seen a crash not from here, and there's 2 people walking around looking like insects.
Yeah. And this is kind of in a time, too, where, like, people were just good people. They're blue-collar workers. They were probably more gullible back then to just believe anything that they were told.
More trusting of our government, too.
Yeah, definitely.
Frank continues to say that the other 2 were dead, and that the one walking around the craft was very sad, almost like you could feel the emotion, like he was sad, like he lost like his best friends or something. "We don't have to be afraid of them, and they aren't here to hurt us," he tells his family. He just felt bad that the firefighter couldn't help them, like the firefighters. After a few short minutes of being at the site, the military showed up and forced them to leave. A couple of days later, Frankie was at the fire station with her dad because she had fallen sick. A state policeman walks into the fire station and gathers up all of the firefighters, proceeding to tell them that he has something to show them. He reaches into his pocket, pulls his hand out like closed up like a fist like this. He then puts his hand over the table and drops what he was holding. The material spreads out like a piece of water, like it, like on the table. No creases or anything. So obviously something we've never seen before.
Right.
The firefighters tried several things with the material, including trying to burn it, but nothing worked. They tried to cut it. That too also failed. It was something like they had never seen before. Frankie took her turn after the firefighters were done messing with it. She said that she would take it and wad it up in her hand, down to the size you didn't even know it was in your hand afterwards. Almost like a speckle. Then when you would drop it, it would spread out all over the table. The material made no noise, no sound, almost like you were just meshing air together. She denies it being aluminum foil.
Yeah, so pretty much like, just imagine like you take a piece of paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you wad it up in your hands. Like you would feel the paper ball. She describes it as like you would wad it up in your hands, and you would have to open your hand and look at it to make sure
it
you're
was
still
there,
holding
yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And then you drop it on the table, and it's pretty much the same. All these people have the same description of this material.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this a little bit too. There's some new evidence, and there's, like Carl said, almost any person that came in contact with any of this material describes it the exact same way. So,
And it's something not from here.
yeah, definitely. 3 or 4 days later, Frankie and her mother were sitting at home with her sister when she noticed a military vehicle pulling up in their driveway. The man proceeds to tell their mother that he'd like to talk to the little girl who'd been at the fire station. From there, he begins interrogating Frankie and on what she saw. He tells her, "I want you to understand that you were never there." And Frankie didn't know what he meant. Frankie, being raised not a liar, started to defend herself, telling the man that she was there. Until he got his point across that he was convincing her she never saw it. He tells her, "I want you to understand you were never there. There are things we can do. We can put your family in POW camps they had for the Japanese and German. And that's if we decide we aren't going to take you to the desert and make you guys disappear altogether. No one would ever find your bodies," he says. Frankie complied and told the officers she wouldn't say anything.
So this was like a very, very big part in this documentary. She was, like we've all seen this documentary, she was like crying.
Still shook. Yeah.
Like crying, talking about it 60 years later.
Yeah.
I think that documentary came out in like 95, so it was almost like 50 years
Yeah,
later.
50 years later at least. Yeah.
Unfortunately, mommy duty's call.
Yeah.
My newborn decided to throw up everywhere.
I phoned up.
She said I throwed up. So I think me and G's just going to finish this one. Okay, so we got like one more point, and then we're going to like discuss all of it. Okay.
Let's do it. Okay, so 3 or 4 days later, Frankie and her mother were sitting at home with her sister when she notices a military vehicle pulling down her driveway. The man proceeds to tell their mother that he'd like to talk to the little girl who had been at the fire station. From there, he begins interrogating Frankie about what she saw. He tells her, "I want you to understand you were never there." And Frankie didn't know what he meant. Frankie, being raised not to be a liar, started to defend herself, telling the man she was there. Until he got his point across that he was convincing her she never saw it.
He was intimidating as fuck.
Yeah, definitely
like,
intimidating.
She tells like a story of like in the documentary, like he's like
He had like a billy
club.
Yeah,
exactly, like a billy club. My grandpa had one. He's just like old school, just smacking his hand.
Every time he finished a sentence or tried to get a point across, he's smacking it in his hand.
Intimidating. Like she admitted in the documentary that for years she didn't realize it was intimidation,
Right.
like until recently.
Yeah, because that's kind of what we talked about earlier. You know, kind of just this being the point in time where people are really patriotic because we've been through 2 world wars now. Being in New Mexico, this is where they were testing, the atomic bombs and things like that. So, at this point, it's kind of just like it was kind of just a thing that people just went along with whatever the government said. So, he tells her, "I want you to understand you were never there. There are things we can do. We can put your family in a POW camp they had for the Japanese or Germans. And that's if we decide we aren't going to take you out to the desert and make you guys disappear altogether. No one would ever find your bodies," he said. Frankie complied and told the officers she would never say anything.
This is a 12-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And this is a military officer hitting a billy club against his hand, pretty much telling the little girl, "We will kill your family if you say anything about any of this for the rest of your life."
And she was definitely shook in the documentary. I mean, if you go back and watch the documentary, it's on YouTube.
Cover up 75 years later.
Yeah, she was crying in the documentary.
And saying she'd wish it'd go away.
Yeah.
Just it never goes away. Like it's Frankie, I think, passed away in 2017.
Okay.
Okay, so like if she was just like if she would made it alive to see like today, like it's way more accepting to like talk about this shit today.
Yeah, because I feel like even back then when they made that documentary, like a lot of people could probably just come right out and be like, "Oh, this lady's
Bullshit."
crazy. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's
But,
bullshit.
you know, as times have got on, these things have been more accepted. I feel like, you know, they've kind of been prepping us, you know, in the media, even in, you know, like movies and stuff. They prepped us to just almost this just be like the norm anymore. So,
I always say it, man. It's like they're putting it all in a crock pot and turning it on low.
yeah.
Yeah. So this was a town. We'll talk about some of the notes that we have. This was just the Frankie Rowe story.
Right.
Right. So a few points that I have is like this was a town of 15,000 people.
Yeah.
Right. And there was 2 radio stations, and the radio stations only had 250 watts. So if you lived outside of Roswell, you couldn't get the radio stations.
Yeah.
The FCC came in. The FCC. We're talking about the freaking FCC, the Family Guy shit, comes in and says, we're suppressing all of it. Yep. You don't put these stories out.
Yeah, and I mean, really, how many ears could even be on this radio station? It kind of just, any move that the government made for any of this stuff, it just kind of just points directly to a cover-up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they thought, and the thing is like the guy says in the documentary, they did a brilliant job. Like they had it all shut down until Mac Brazel walks in to the sheriff's department and says, "Look what I got."
Yeah, and even to the Mac Brazel point, it's like they even knew at that point, like there wasn't another crash. You know what I mean? Like, so when he brought the debris in, They had it contained even to a point of that. Like, they took Mac Brazel off and they put him on base in, like, a guest house to where no one could get to him, ask him any questions. But at the same time, like, that's all he had was debris. So that's when they start kind of unfolding the cover-up that this was a weather balloon. And I think it was even in almost up to the 90s or something.
So, yeah. So,
that.
the government, or the release was that it was a weather balloon. Okay, which was obviously full of shit. Even Frankie Rose says in the documentary that her father knew it was not a weather balloon. Like
Right.
he would not have been excited over a weather balloon. Like this is not weather balloon properties.
And they tried to, the cover up was they tried to say that it was a weather balloon to detect missiles from Russians. That was the whole cover up, even that they released, I think, even up into the 90s.
In 1994, it came out that it was a Project Mogul.
Secret, yeah.
Project
That's what it's called.
Mogul.
Yep. Secret project.
And it was a project to detect German nuclear warheads.
Yeah.
And so, if that's the case, why wait 50 years
Right.
to tell us this?
Exactly.
You're just letting all of the time pass. Okay.
Well, and here's another point too. So, William Blanchard was actually the Air Force officer that made the press release. I think it was a day after the actual crash, or
Yep.
where they have discovered, and the militaries went out to the crash site.
And I think the press release literally said military or something recovers flying disc.
Yeah, yeah. And, a lot of people in this documentary that we've kind of based this around, it was children of people that worked with this guy, William Blanchard. They never pegged this guy as a liar. They never pegged him as somebody that would, make things up. So when it comes down to a press release coming from this guy, being as high up in the Air Force as he was, they literally go back. I think it was the very next day or 2 days later. They backtrack and
retracted everything
and say that that's not what happened. It was a weather balloon, and it just points all to a cover up. You know what I mean? When they release this stuff right off the bat, and that's kind of where we talked earlier, where it's like the fact that civilians got to these things first is kind of what blew it all up. You know what I mean? And the fact that a guy even as high as William Blanchard believed it, made the press release, and then you have people above him come and just shut it all down.
Who was the guy that had the theory that... So there's a theory that the material that these people found was actually like an ejection plan.
Oh, it was Jesse Marcel, which I got some stuff pulled up right here about him. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force.
So Jesse Marcel thinks, like, his theory, one of his theories is like...
It was actually Jesse Marcel Jr. that had the theories that we were talking about.
Okay. So Jesse Marcel Jr. had this theory that when this plane was crashing or going down or whatever, that the material actually found was pieces of like an ejection, like get us out of the ship.
Yeah.
And that's how like one of them actually survived.
Yeah, one of his theories was that maybe the ships that they actually recovered or the debris from them were maybe an escape pod to a bigger ship, and that's what would kind of explain some of the debris that they found scattered out in such a wide area.
Makes sense. I
Makes
mean,
a lot of sense.
like I was just telling you a little bit ago before we came back on air, like you think of like an airbag, like you.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, exactly. And Jesse Marcel Jr. actually, his father actually brought him a lot of the debris. I think it was a day or 2 days after, and then his father actually came to him later in life and told him that he was part of the cover-up because he was one of the people pictured holding up the foil that they said was part of the air balloon. And his father, ended up recanting that statement and coming out and telling his son later in life, probably towards the end of his life, that wasn't the actual material they found.
Yes,
and it was very similar to what everybody else explained it was.
Yeah, that's like if you search Roswell on Google, that's like one of the first pictures that pop up is Jesse Marcel. It's Jesse Marcel that did that, right?
Yep. Holding
up like he's like smiling at the camera, holding up what looks like an aluminum foil kite.
Yeah, and he was also the one that found. That's what led to him thinking that it was an in-flight explosion because he found almost rods that would be for like framing or something that had like almost like hieroglyphic symbols.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Here's a fun fact. So in that documentary, Frankie tells this story because we keep forgetting that. Like we could talk about the materials and all this shit, but we keep forgetting that like Frankie's dad was, like she said, it was the most excited she's ever seen him, and he told the story of seeing people at the crash site.
And there's actually another point in that documentary where Frankie talks about an older lady used to come and visit her.
I was about to
visit her mother and talk to her, and he was a contractor. He was a painter.
Yeah, the older lady's husband. The older lady was friends with their mom, and her husband was a painter in the military. Yeah. I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, he was like a contractor, so he was contracted to paint at the base, and actually said that he actually saw the bodies come in on stretchers, and then actually saw the actual alien being walked in, and it was kind of a thing where he said, "Oh yeah, they tell him not to say anything, tell him not to look, but if you're in there, man, you're gonna peek, you're gonna try to get a glimpse," and that's what he said he saw.
And the mother asked, I think her name was like Gilly Mae or something. It was like one of them 40s names.
Yeah, one of them crazy names.
It's like Gilly Mae or something like that. She was like, did Herbert ask you what the figure looked like? And then Gilly Mae told her that it looked like the child of the earth. Yeah. Like the same exact story that Frank had. Yeah. And the child of the earth is like the small body, big headed, big
kind of
eye.
Looks like a mixture between like an ant and a grasshopper. We'll put it up on the screen.
We'll put it up on the screen. And you can't, like, why would they lie about this?
Especially back then, man. It's just like you'd have been labeled crazy, probably an outcast the rest of your life with some of this stuff. And it's like too many people come forward and say the same exact things that weren't around each other, had no, didn't cross paths and any of these things. And
it was just a lot easier back then to hush everybody. Yep. And you just can't do that in today's society. Obviously, we're starting to see that. We're starting to see more and more whistleblowers come through. Because the more whistleblowers that quote unquote come up missing, the more questions that are going to be asked. Yeah. In a town of 15,000 people, you can make everybody go missing.
Yeah, and at that point too, like imagine what they're going to do now to keep it hush hush. Something like that to that extent happens, because back then, I mean, they're threatening 12-year-olds, threatening whole families. You know what I mean? And I actually sent Carl a video today that I watched, and I think it might have been on the History Channel.
UFO hunters.
Yeah. Okay. So these guys actually go out, and it's kind of like a Bigfoot formatted show where they go out and they kind of look for things. They're not going to find things, but they had.
There's a couple good theories.
Yeah, a couple good theories on that. Which there's actually a theory that there was another crash that was actually related. They kind of have this theory in the show that it was two ships that crashed into each other, and if you think like a game of pool, like a cue ball, like you hit this ball and the cue ball goes bouncing the opposite way. So that's kind of another theory of where they describe like the debris being scattered in such a wide area. And this was in what they say, it was San Augustine.
San Augustine.
Yeah,
Yep.
in New Mexico. So this is 250 miles away from the crash site from the Roswell incident, and they think kind of similar stories,
Especially with how fast they were going. If they're going that fast,
Oh yeah, and that they describe the debris being spread out in that wide of an area because there's even a guy that comes forward. They have a new witness that nobody's ever interviewed. They actually called the guy. They got a hold of him, and they said it was kind of surprised because they called him, and as soon as they called, he was like, "Yeah, I'm ready to talk." So this is an old man. He's 82 years old. His name's Earl Fulford, and this guy was he served in the Army. I think he might have been in the Air Force too.
old dude.
Yeah, so he was actually dispatched. I wouldn't even say dispatched, but he said the next morning of the morning of the crash, they came and got, I think he said like 12 to 20 guys, and they go out, and he's part of this cleanup crew cleaning up the debris. This guy's 250 miles away, describes the material the exact same way
As the people in Roswell did.
Yes, and this is, I don't know how old this is, just been a couple years ago, I'd imagine, but they actually had Jesse Marcel Jr. on the show. They bring materials to him, and they try to get him to pick one that's the closest. There's a couple different metal materials. They lay them out on the table. They do it separate times. Neither one of them's, one does it, the other one's not in the room, and then the next one comes and does it. They pick the same exact metal. And then
this is from 2 different crash sites.
Right, from 2 different crash sites. He actually described everything about exactly how Frankie did. They said that there was bodies recovered from this crash site also, if I remember correctly. But this guy, I can't remember who had the artifact, but there's an actual artifact that they say that they actually had from one of the crash sites still. They tested the metal. It had a very high heat index, so what it would take to melt it, melting index, whatever you'd want to call it. But to have the index that it had, the metals that they used, or even I don't even think they had it in metal form at this point. It wasn't invented until the 60s. So if it is an actual, it's alleged because no one can prove that it actually.
It's all
came from
allegedly.
that. But yeah, it's all allegedly. But at the end of the day, they kind of debunked the weather balloon theory with that. They tested this metal, and the Earl Fulford guy had a lot of crazy similarities in his story than everybody else in Roswell.
There's several, like, we're telling you guys all these like talking points and all these stories about this shit because there's a lot of things that have a lot of commonalities.
Yeah.
Like all these people's stories line up with each other, and then if you count in the fact that let me tell you something. If you guys go watch that documentary, the Cover Up 75 Years Later documentary, and if you watch that Frankie Rowe interview and you think she's acting, if you think she's talking out of her ass,
she's got tears.
Give her the Oscar.
Yeah, hit her with the Oscar.
Give her the Oscar when she's telling the story of being intimidated by a grown man telling him.
Yeah, you can tell it damaged her mentally, bro. Like,
she said she didn't announce it to her kids or her husband.
They were mad at her.
They were mad at her.
She said, my kids were mad at me. I had a mad husband.
The entire army, Mac Brazel, the Frankie, all of her family, the entire fire department, the radio stations, the media, they were all sworn to secrecy.
Yep.
Like, you cannot tell anyone what happened.
That
is not a weather balloon. I don't even think it's a spy plane. Like, why the fuck would you be silencing people over a spy plane?
I don't know, man.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
None of it makes sense to me. I mean, especially the biggest thing that just throws the fork in it right off the bat is the press release. They come out, the Army or the Air Force gives a press release, and then they try to backtrack from there. Yeah. And you can only imagine. I mean, you say something as a guy that's like halfway up in the military. Then all your bosses come and they're like, "Hey, Bubby, you fucked up.
You fucked up.
Time to fucking backpedal.
Yep. Time to go on vacation for 2 weeks.
Make some shit up." Yeah, they sent everybody off. Anybody that knew anything, they sent them off. There was one of the guys. He was sent to Houston to a different base. There's a guy that went on leave.
So there was media outlets from London, trying to get a hold of people from Roswell. Like, what's going on? And everybody was gone.
Yeah, they couldn't get a hold of it.
The story went away.
Yeah.
Perfect cover-up.
They covered it up. That was probably
That's-
the most documented cover-up.
Yeah, that's why this case was like the biggest so far, and we knew we had to cover it.
Now, and that was something weird, even to go back to Earl Fulford. In that show, he actually talked about days leading up. There was multiple sightings from
Over 300,
not just him, but a lot of the guys that he was in the Air Force with.
across the U.S.
Yeah.
There was
Oh, yeah,
over
that-
300 sightings across the U.S.
Leading up to that.
At that time.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like there was like this event, like I was telling you before we recorded this. It's like during these weird time periods, man, we're in one right now.
Yeah.
Like, these UFO sightings ramp up.
Yeah, and you got to think at that time, like they had just been testing atomic bombs out in New Mexico.
Atomic bombs, like the thing that could potentially destroy the world.
Yeah.
Like, we're coming here to stop you guys from destroying the world.
Even a lot of them now, you get UFO sightings around nuclear power plants.
Well, I mean, and we're like over the threshold of World War III.
Yeah,
We're seeing more UFO sightings than ever. Like,
yeah.
these people, and it's like you would think they're not here to hurt us, or else they already would have.
right.
They're like telling us like, you're gonna fucking kill
You're gonna
yourself.
fucking kill yourself.
But that's a wormhole we can wait to go down.
Yeah.
More episodes like that
Yeah,
coming.
we're gonna keep getting trippy on you guys, so just keep tuning in.
Next week,
We're
X
We're going
Tentacion.
yes, sir.
Music.
And
Just
this-
me and G.
And this is why we named the show the Algorithm Podcast, because we're gonna hit every part of your algorithm on your YouTube, on your TikTok, and we're gonna come with good content every single time, man.
Couple good announcements for future episodes too.
Yeah.
Spooky month.
Spooky month, October's coming, bro. We're about to
All 4 episodes will
to have
be...
the set popping. We're about to.
Oh
go
yeah.
on hand.
Oh yeah.
I'm excited.
Yep, me too.
Tune in, folks.
All we got for today. Subscribe
Follow
to everything.
Yes, sir.
Spotify soon. Peace.